Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to NOLA Theater Talk. My name is Alan Smason, and I'm here broadcasting on the NOLA Theater Folk Facebook group, the Theater Criticism.com Facebook page, the YouTube channel that I have as well. This goes on every Monday night for the most part, and we hope that people will keep in mind that we are here on Mondays when most of the theaters are dark. The idea being that we want to bring a little light to the theater. We have been doing this now since the pandemic started in 2020. So I guess this is almost 3 years we've been doing this. And again, I want to thank everybody for being with us through the years. I will tell you, first off, that I've been involved with a little bit of the Mardi Gras duties that I have around this time. So a lot of my focus has been off of theater. Several reviews that I would have liked to have written this past couple of weeks. I was unable to because of other duties, writing some of the carnival balls that I have been doing for many decades, or announcing them. That is the narration of the actual manuscript at the carnival balls, or perhaps as I did this weekend for the cruise of Pontchartrain in Carrollton, announcing the parades either at Gallier Hall or doing so at the Intercontinental Hotel. So some of my duties keep me occupied, but also keep me from doing some of my work as a theater critic and reviewer. So hopefully people will forgive me, but there's only so much of me to go around. I have to tell you though, I'm to have my guest tonight who's in. We've been talking a little bit about through the past several years about so many of the wonderful productions being put on, and you can see their little logo up there by Goat in the Road Productions. And we're so privileged, so happy tonight to actually have in the studio with us Chris Kaminstein, who is the co-artistic director, Shannon Flaherty being the other co-artistic director. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So, and Shannon was not able to make it with us tonight because, as you said, Shannon is the mother of a young'un, 1-year-old, and there are certain things, duties that moms have to be called for. But Chris, I'm delighted to have you in. And again, we may have done one of these before. I don't remember if we did. I thought maybe we had done one of these before with you. You've been in here, right?
I think so. Yeah, we did one a few years back now.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the format as far as that goes. And I just wanted to say that you have gotten now into a little bit of a niche, which I don't think anybody else in New Orleans can profess to doing. There are a lot of places, venues, if you will, where people, as an example, the NOLA Project, they partner with the Sculpture Garden, the Sydney and Walter Bestoff Sculpture Garden, and they put on shows there. Or perhaps you've got an unusual venue on St. Claude Avenue, like a backyard ballroom, or some of these other places that might not necessarily be dedicated entirely to theater. They might also be dedicated to musical acts and things of that sort, or unusual acts that might be performed. But in your particular case, you actually partner with historic places and make them into venues for the productions that you've been doing. Now, I will say that a few years ago, the Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival did the same sort of thing. I believe they presentation of several of the one-act plays by Tennessee Williams at the Herman Grimm House. Mm-hmm. And again, that's one of the oldest of the homes that are in the French Quarter that are existing. And again, I think the oldest structure that's in the French Quarter, if I'm not mistaken, is the Ursuline nuns
Convent.
Abbey, the convent that was there. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But other than that, I think the Herman Grimm House is certainly right there, right behind them, as having been one of the older structures in the quarter. But you partnered actually with most recently. You did a production, and we'll talk about it at Tulane, doing a story about Tulane's, I guess you might say, a study of the sexual practices and some of the things that go on campus, a study that was done originally back in 2019, and you made it into a play and presented at Tulane, about Tulane, and you've also done, and that was called Roleplay, which was remounted just recently, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But also Uninvited, a play about what happened actually at the James Gallier house after Mr. Gallier had passed on, and his family members were still there, and what happened during a specific time when the White League was challenging a certain number of things going on in society at that time, and really you had an opportunity to present that in the very house where the I guess you might say imagined events in terms of the dialogues that you had to come up with, construct, would have taken place. And you've done this time and time again. Most recently, the family line was presented at the Beauregard Kai's house, what they'd like to call now the BK house, which I always say you better not call it BK too long because people may think it's Burger King, but that's all right.
Right.
But anyway, but Beauregard Kai's is again very famous. I think related to Francis Scott Key's and also if I'm not mistaken, the lady who may have written Dinner at Antoine's, right?
Francis Parkinson Keys.
So we know that there's a little bit of history there going on. So it's interesting. You've got all those historic houses, and you've got Tulane University being utilized to present a play about what goes on their campus. It's brilliant. It's absolutely taking theater and making it even more meaningful, because the venue has quite a bit to do with what was going on in the family line, which you also presented at Beauregard Kai's that I was mentioning. It's based on other historical events that occurred in a citywide strike, and we can get into all the details of that later. But the point is that you're in a house which very much was probably affected by that strike of, I believe, was it 1892?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
1892.
So you're really kind of reliving it and experiencing the same sort of four walls that the people who were living in that time actually would have had to. I hope you're not allergic to me, but that's so as we know, we always have a little bit of an icebreaker. We talk about what we bring into the room, et cetera, for to have as far as a drink. And part of that is a little icebreaker, just so not to make fun of people what they drink or don't drink. We don't encourage people to break their programs if they're not drinking any longer, if they are working a program. But for those of us who are able to engage in a little libation from time to time, I think it's always nice to see what people bring in, what they like, what they don't like, so I'm bringing in something I've never brought into the room before. You see what that is? And the cup to go with it. There we go. This is sake.
I love this.
I've never had sake before. So tonight, and it's heated. We've been on a couple of minutes, so it's not as hot as it should be, but it's good. It's good enough. So I have a little rice wine sake, and I didn't know what you brought in.
I brought in, I actually have a non-alcoholic for no other good reason than I think an alcoholic thing would make me fall asleep, because I have a 2.5-year-old at home. This is a Waterloo, and it is a cherry limeade Waterloo.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, I'm sorry about my sneezing fit here.
It's okay. It's okay. So now you've got a 2.5-year-old, and Shannon's got a 1.5-year-old. You said that the goats are procreating now, huh?
Yeah, exactly. We've been a theater company since 2008. So we started a theater company. Shannon and I were part of the founding, and a lot of us who were sort of in the company when we started were in our mid-20s. And now I'm 41, and a lot of the people who are involved in the company are sort of middle of their life.
Right.
So it shifts a lot. It shifts a lot about the kind of art we do. It shifts a lot about like what our daily practice is as art makers. 15 years into having a company, it's just a different rhythm.
I have to ask a real quick question. You're originally from Philadelphia. What brought you to New Orleans?
I had a friend who is a filmmaker here, Ben Zeitlin. He made this movie Beast of the Southern Wild, and he was a roommate of mine in college, and I had a lot of friends who were sort of involved in the making of that film. They were filmmakers who had come here in 2006 2006, 2007, soon after Katrina, and had really talked about the beauty of the city and how amazing it was as a place, as a cultural spot, as a spot to be an artist and make art. And I was in New York at the time. I was sort of struggling to figure out my path as an actor, director. Wasn't having much success, and decided to come down here. It was
what was
in
it
a
about
way
What was it about
a
New
whim.
Orleans besides the fact that your roommate had done Beasts of the Southern Wild? Was it anything about New Orleans that attracted you? Was it the music? Was it the food? Was it the ambiance, the friendliness of the people?
Combination of all those things. I think one of the big things that attracted me originally into the city, one of the first weeks I was here, I got invited over to a house. There was a friend of a friend who just was being kind and having me over with my girlfriend at the time. And, we hear music down the street, sort of vaguely in the background. And they're like, we're playing a board game. And they're like, come on. And so we get up and we get our shoes on and we run out of the house and we go catch the end of this, random parade and march with it for, maybe half an hour and come back around to the house. And that was sort of my first introduction to the feeling of the city. And the feeling of the city, I think a friend had once said this, New Orleans is politically backwards, but culturally advanced. So politically, it's terrible, right? We're just in a place where things don't function properly and government doesn't function the way we want it to. But culturally, the way that people consume culture, practice culture, is, I think, more advanced in this city than many other cities. And by that, I mean, everyone I know does something artistic, even if they're amateurs at it. They write poetry, they make costumes, they go to plays, they go to dance. There's a feeling of being like in a soup of culture here. And that very quickly was something that was like really beautiful about this place.
Well, you're right. It's not like any other place that you'll ever discover in the United States. And whether we have a problem with our politics, or whether or not that's just the way that we've always done things and things never really get done properly, and we accept it as that. New Orleans attracts a lot of people who are artistic, and people like Tennessee Williams and the list of the litany of writers and other creative people that have come out of New Orleans, obviously, is something to behold. And even people we talk about, in music, obviously, people like Louis Armstrong, but even people like Harry Connick Jr., were exposed to what came before and have gone on to achieve great fame in other arenas because of what they were exposed to, whether it be a movie star or whether it be a band leader and things of that sort. And I can tell you that Harry began life as the son of a judge and an attorney who happened to own a record store, loved music, and exposed him to the music, and taught him piano lessons and said, hey, James Booker, would you mind teaching Harry how to play a little? So just the whole idea about that, so,
I mean, I will say this, you at the beginning, you were talking about the different productions we've been doing recently, which all are sort of have community partnership elements. And I think one of the interesting things about doing this for the last 15 years is that I came to New Orleans with a specific idea about how the kind of theater I might want to make and the art that I wanted to make. But that's totally shifted over the years because there's an interplay in terms of what audiences want and communities need and what you are capable of making as an artist. And so that conversation has really changed me in terms of New Orleans changing me, the people in New Orleans changing me as an artist and changing what my expectations of what my art should look like. So I just wanted to say that.
I'd like to sort of get into the process. First off, I know that you all won some awards, was it for the Stranger Disease a few years back, right?
Yeah, Stranger Disease.
So now, who don't know, the Stranger Disease was, maybe you want to fill in the blanks as to what that was. It was because people who were not necessarily from New Orleans, right, would come here to the city and get this disease who were strangers. Was that that kind of how they came up with the name?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
You're seeing something strange here.
It might. Yeah.
I'll keep talking. I think exactly. People would come here and they would get the disease because they weren't immune to the disease. And so there was this process of culling people, oftentimes people who were new to the city wouldn't be able to. Sorry, I'm going to change my camera here. I think I'm good now.
There you are. Yeah.
People who are new to the city would get the disease, whereas people who had been here for many years would be immune to it. So the nickname for the yellow fever became the stranger's disease.
Well, not the French disease, but the stranger disease, right? So,
right.
So those of you who didn't get to see it, a really wonderfully attended and also critically acclaimed piece, and I think that may be one of the productions that you did, right? I mean, I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that you've done, but that one in particular stands out in my mind.
Yep. That was the first of our reconstruction cycle. It was the first immersive piece that we did. We did it at Madame John's Legacy, which is on Dumaine and Royal or thereabouts. And it was our first attempt to try this sort of immersive style theater where audience members can follow whoever they want around a house and have choice about what storylines they follow. Like all of our immersive pieces later on, it cycles twice. So as an audience member, you can follow one path and then a different path. But also, there are too many paths to follow. So you can never see everything in one night of attending.
You can get close. You can get close, but you never really get to see everything. And sometimes that's important. Most of the time, though, you get to see things that you miss. You go back and say, "Oh, I get it. I understand now." I say, or there's always like a question: how does this person know what happened here? And then you go into another room and you see it's revealed. So
right.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So let's go back. I mean, we're not going to talk about the stranger disease because that was some years ago.
Sure.
But the one I think that I wanted to go into first off was the Uninvited, and again that's one of the more compelling pieces that you did. Again, at the Gallier House.
Yeah.
And this thing, I want to say, probably would have been running maybe still today were it not for COVID, right? You got shut down by wasn't that correct? You got shut down by COVID in
March?
We
ran for 8 weeks, and then March 20th we were shut down because COVID hit. Like all of everyone's experience, we had like sort of our moment. We were on the phone the night before. We were saying like, well, is this serious or not? Maybe we should just keep the show going. And the next morning we all realized like, oh, we can't. And we canceled the rest of the run at that time. We were sort of scheduled to run for at least another 4 weeks.
Again, at the Gallier House.
At the Gallier House.
It's supposed to be the family of the Galliers and also their servants. So you had two different distinct tracks. One was the servants, if you will, the black caretakers of the house, and then you had the other aspects, the white people who were either residents or also maids, etc., and caretakers as well. And so you got to really get an idea about the different classes of people that there were in New Orleans at the time and how readily they mixed with each other. It was really kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the second in our reconstruction cycle, and we were interested in that period of time, 1874 New Orleans, because it's a moment of great hope. There's actually a lot of political change in the air. Not only is there integrated education and integrated state government, but there's also public funding for education. And there's a feeling that Reconstruction can really change the way that racial politics work in America. So that at that moment in time, we were interested in looking at what was happening in New Orleans. And what we found was we had this partnership with the Gallier House, which is on Royal Street, and right next door at what is now the Lalaurie Mansion, there was at the time an integrated girls' school. And in this year of 1874, there was a white mob that came together to try to forcibly segregate integrated schools. And so we sort of inserted the Gallier family into this storyline to look at this moment when people were trying to make social progress and progressive progress, and was squashed by white mob violence.
And let me just say, if for those of you who are not familiar with the period too, New Orleans was the most occupied city of the Confederacy beyond the war. It was captured in 1862, and 10 years later, Reconstruction was still going on. There were still federal troops stationed in New Orleans because of its importance as a port city, but also because I think there was a general nature of New Orleanians to kind of fight the authorities and push back. And I don't think that the federal people really ever trusted New Orleans very, very much. But so somewhere around 1874, what you're talking about, the federal forces have moved out, and the people who were put in place during the Reconstruction era to run things are now being challenged by the people who are trying to fill that power vacuum left behind. But when the federal troops left, and yes, that was the time of the attempted coup, if you remember what some people have called the Battle of Lewis, and others have basically said it was an attempt by the former powers that be, the White League and other people like that, to take over the city and to try to bring back, if you will, the former people in power and try to sweep out many of the changes that have been brought in. And indeed, a lot of that happened after the federal forces left. That a lot of the good old boys, as it were, came back into power, and a lot of people who thought that they might have been able to succeed in a quote unquote new Orleans, found out the hard way that wasn't the way business was going to be conducted moving forward, and laid the way for so many of the other things that we learned about, in more recent times, about the romanticism, if you will, of the Old South, and the lost cause, and all of those things that go along with that the statuary, the statues that came down not too long ago under the Mitch Landrieu administration. A lot of those were put up, post 1874, including the statue of Robert E. Lee, who, by the way, never came to New Orleans, never really had much of a connection to New Orleans, including the basically the Liberty Monument, as they referred to it, but it was essentially the battle for that coup that we were talking about, and so many of the other statuary that went up later on that sort of glorified, if you will, that quote unquote lost cause of the Confederacy. So you being from Philadelphia, you didn't understand a lot of that, I'm sure, when you came in. You said, well, why are statues of these Confederate soldiers up here? And again, some of them were like, as an example, Jefferson Davis. He was very closely allied with a lot of the people here in the city. That's why they put that particular monument up at Canal Street. But I think something like, go ahead.
I mean, I think one of the reasons these monuments were put up is because there was storytelling going on. And the storytelling that was going on was that the wrong side won. I think one of the reasons we're interested in this Reconstruction history is I went to school, I learned history. Here's how my history class went. We learned about the Civil War. Then we skipped to the Progressive era, 1905, 1910, Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
We didn't really get anything from 1865 to 1890 in there. And one of the things that I realized, rereading the history, and I'm not a historian, I'm an amateur historian at best, was that this is a moment when social progress is possible, right? There's great possibility. There's some federal support around not only ending slavery, but giving some people who are enslaved the resources needed in order to actually become full citizens. That experiment lasted for such a short time, 10 years. And then white people basically got tired of it and were like, good luck. Black people in the city were disenfranchised again. I mean, the government that was coming in after the Battle of Liberty Pace was an undemocratic government. It was a government that was trying to disenfranchise anyone who was Black. And sure enough, you look at the voting rolls, you have thousands and thousands of people voting who are Black and Creole in the city. And then as soon as 1890s come around, you've got that number dropping to almost nothing. And I think that area and the questions around why that happened is really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And as a company, one of the things we want with the theater that we do is to let people glimpse how has this been done in the past, what has succeeded, what has failed, and why has it failed, if it's failed. Because we're in a moment now where we have challenges that are similar and different as a country. And if we're wondering, what is the model for making long-term change, we can, do worse than to look back at some of these people who were fighting for this change back then. It was not perfect, but it was really fascinating to look at that.
1874, again, you're talking about a period, not really much, but there's a lot going on in New Orleans. We did have, I think the Irish immigration had come here, and the Italians were starting to filter into the city. A lot of them from Sicily, etc. Trying to find, and you mentioned some of this, I think, in the family line that we talk about later on. But there's a lot of different peoples who have yet to come to New Orleans. As a matter of fact, my great grandmother and my great grandfather and grandmother had yet to arrive in the city. They didn't arrive for several decades to come. And even though, despite that, I'm still, I guess, a fifth generation, New Orleanian.
Wow.
So despite that, but the fact is that much of these things that went on happened before my particular line, if you will, arrived on these shores. And so we need to be mindful of history, because a lot of my family, as it were, and I don't know about your particular situation, they were leaving Russia and Ukraine, etc., where there were pogroms, and they were trying to survive with their lives and whatever shirts they had on their back, to come to a land that offered them, an opportunity to practice their religion and perhaps to be free and have an opportunity to earn, a livable wage for their family. So, those are the sorts of things that we talk about. I'm not quite sure, but I wanted to, to move on to a couple of the other pieces that we've got here. The Uninvited, we mentioned, the different class structure. And again, it's so beautiful that you were able to use the Gallier House, because it's so well maintained, and you do have that opportunity in the upstairs, you get to see the playfulness, if you will, between the sisters and the mom, being stern with them, etc. And then you get to see, people like Ian Hawke there is representing, one of the members of the White League, trying to really have his way, and basically it had to do with, if I'm not mistaken, with a school that was having the audacity, if you will, according to the White League, teaching young Black students, English and things of that sort, right? I mean, they had
it was an integrated girls' school.
Yeah. And so one of the teachers is scared for her life, because of the fact that the White League is coming in. They say, if you continue this, you're putting your life in danger. And again, what all that entails for the people who are trying to maintain the status quo, and trying to also be progressive, but are unable to, because they're fearful as to what the politics will prevail in of that time. So that was, as I said, that was the Uninvited, and again a show that unfortunately was cut short due to COVID. Now that was back in 2020, was cut short, but recently you've just had a remounting of Roleplay, and again, I've got the new cast here. This is the 2023 cast that you had. You just did this remounting.
Yep.
And again, now are most of these kids proper?
Say that again.
Are all these kids Tulane students?
They
that
are,
monitor
yeah.
this? So you don't have anybody coming in from outside. These kids are actually assuming the roles of real, if you will, from their campus. Some of which may have been culled from 2019 and earlier. And I know I talked with you about possibly having. I was Katherine Johnson was the lady who was conducting the survey at Tulane.
Yep.
And so essentially, this was like a survey determining not just the sexual habits of Tulane students, which I think is really interesting because when I attended Tulane, nobody inquired as to what our habits were or whatever. It was all very quiet. Nobody talked about anything.
Yeah.
And nowadays, with the whole questions about gender fluidity and different pronouns and things of that sort. There's people are a lot more accepting and a lot more tolerant of certain things that probably were swept under the carpet when I was a student at Tulane. You just never mentioned. You never talked about it.
Yeah, well, the show originally came out of something called a climate survey, and a climate survey. The big headline from that survey in 2017, and I didn't have a connection with Tulane at all before this, was that 40% of female identifying students reported being sexually assaulted while they were at Tulane. And it was this incredible moment where, female identifying folks on campus were looking at each other and saying, like, this is a pandemic. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic where this is being proliferated. This is allowed to happen. People are not being brought forth brought to justice for these situations. And more than that we are swimming in this water that has no regard for our autonomy or our bodies. And so out of that, there was a few things that happened. This filmmaker, Katie Matthews, and Darcy Fulcher, who's one of our ensemble members who was teaching there, got together and were like, we should really do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
And they connected with this professor, Jenny Mercine, who's an amazing theater professor there, and connected with Shannon and myself, and Denise Frazier, who also works at Tulane at the Center for the Gulf South and is an ensemble member. And I think the question in mind here was, this is a unique opportunity for theater to actually play an important role. Because if you can put on a show in a small community like Tulane and reach 1,500 people, you can reach, a fifth of that community, of that on-campus community. And if you can reach that many, that big of a percentage of people, you can actually make a shift in maybe how people are thinking about things, not as a lecture, but as a genuine mirror to how campus is working. And so our task at the time was to bring together students. We had 15 Tulane students originally involved in the piece who were coming in to talk about their experiences on campus, both with gender and sexuality, but also with stress and anxiety, and then improvise scenes based on what they were experiencing. And then we basically took those improvisations and we built them into a script that involved 11 characters and sort of going through their year, fall, winter, spring. What happens? And you're seeing a bunch of the pictures from the original 2019 show here. And one of the things that we found was that theater could play an effective role because we weren't preaching at anyone. We were just offering what we felt like was a genuine glimpse of what the campus culture was at the time, that these students that you see pictures of were bringing to the table.
Before we go, and I've got a bunch more pictures from the 2019 production, which I was so happy to see, but I missed it. I missed the original production because you did it one weekend. It was like,
Right.
we're gonna show a very important show, but if you're not there Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, too bad. Sorry, you'll have to wait till we remount it. And I waited. I didn't know that you were going to remount it, obviously, but I have to ask the question because I was a student at Tulane, and we now have the Me Too movement, et cetera, that popped up around that same time, and so a lot of people were really, I would say, focused on the whole idea of rape and the whole idea of assault and things of that sort. But I have to ask, and maybe maybe the survey how much of this goes on at other campuses, or is Tulane, a different? I mean, was there more of it at Tulane than there were at other campuses and things that sort? Do we know?
Yeah, a little bit. My perception, my understanding is that this is really bad across the board on university campuses. And there's a documentary about this called The Hunting Ground, which does a good job of talking about some of the numbers. Tulane's on the upper end, or at least in the climate survey of 2017, was on the upper end of reported cases of sexual assault. And it's not totally surprising. Tulane has sort of become known as a party school.
Yeah.
Party schools tend to have higher rates of sexual assault on campus. But
alcohol is a big factor, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think alcohol is one of those things where people who are, especially victims of sexual assault, will tell you alcohol is not the reason. It is simply a way that it becomes easier to do this. But I'll say that I think that a culture on a university campus exists in sort of all these nuanced ways. And a lot of times things become acceptable where people aren't necessarily seen as fully human. And so you're looking at trying to examine what that is.
Yeah, like I said, one of the things about seeing the remounting of Roleplay, and you did run it, thank God, you ran it from like January the 27th or so till February the 5th, something like that, right?
Yeah. We had 8 shows.
Yeah, and the idea was that the people who had missed it, like me, were able to see these things all over again. In some cases,
it's a totally new group of students now too. Yeah. And anyone on campus who was there in 2019 has not been there for all those folks have been gone. So
again, one of the things that they dealt with was not only just sexual assault, but also in some cases, how relationships were fulfilled or not fulfilled. Some traditional, if you will, boy girl, some girl, things of that sort. It was quite revealing, and a lot of things that probably might not have been talked about back in the days when I was a student at Tulane.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think even today, there's a lot of anxiety about LGBTQ issues. As much as they're in the news, people still are not in a place where they're necessarily comfortable on campus as LGBTQ people. And you saw that come out in the show. We remounted the show. We asked people for their input who were in the new show. We said, let's update the script. And people were still reporting a lot of incidents of being in uncomfortable situations at parties as a person who might be queer. I mean, I think the other thing that got updated this time was what you're talking about, especially around gender and gender pronouns. That was something in 2019 that had just been percolating in the culture. And now in 2023, it's much more accepted, a larger part of people's experience and young people's experience. And so we updated the script to try to reflect that, what people were going through. And on the one hand, I say, 2019 to now, some things have changed. Language is different. The word consent is much more part of our vocabulary than it was in 2019. On the other hand, I would say like a lot of this, when I went to school 20 years ago, is similar. A lot of the conversations are similar.
Yeah. Again, it's a very interesting situation. And I don't know whether or not you could, in the course of a play, no matter how long it was, in this particular play was, I think, about 90 minutes without an intermission, correct? And you chose not to have an intermission because it's got such an emotional arc on it and so many different stories going on. To start and stop that would, I think, have been probably difficult for you to try to imagine where to stop it, where to restart, etc. Right?
Yeah, we did 80 minutes. Probably if we did it again, we'd shave another 10 minutes up. Also, no one's doing intermissions anymore. This is the new theater thing. No one does intermissions, which I sort of empathize with. Starting a show after an intermission can be hard. But all the shows you see on Broadway, everything's now like 90 minutes, no intermission.
I just saw Some Like It Hot. They have an intermission.
They do.
The Neil Diamond musical,
guess, yeah.
They have an intermission. But yeah, a lot of the plays, Leopoldstadt, as an example, which, by the way, have you seen yet?
No. Is it good?
You will want to see it. It's going to end summer of 2023. So You got till like June or so to go check it out. But
Yeah.
I promise you, 2 hours, 10 minutes, no intermission, but riveting. And my personal feeling is that it probably deserves to win the the Tony Award for Best Play. But again, I'm only one voice in the wilderness, but that it really impacted me. And as somebody who's of Jewish heritage, you probably would be interested in terms of dealing with the the climate of anti-Semitism that pervaded Austria through the 5 generations that Tom Stoppard depicts. And just an amazing situation, because Stoppard, people may now, but he didn't even know he was Jewish until he was in his 50s. So that for him to write a play like this, which is so steeped in identification with people being Jewish, or if you will, for people who are steeped in identification as not being Jewish, even though they were born into a Jewish family, those people who thought that they were safe because they no longer identified as Jewish and they attended church and they were Christians, and then to come find out that no, you're still Jewish, and by the way, this way to the camps for you. Thank you very much. So it's very, very compelling, and again, I have to say that it was written very well, and there's so many little Easter eggs that he throws in there that you need to know a little bit about, that you need to do a little bit of research on to appreciate some of the things that he does. To get back though to you and Goat in the Road, we're talking to Chris Kaminstein, and Chris is here representing Goat in the Road. You can see their symbol up there, but Goat in the Road Productions, you said they started up in 2008 and have been doing a number of really wonderful works. In particular, for those late, have been doing a lot of work in venues that are of historic venues, historic places, such as the Beauregard Kai's house, such as the James Gallier house, and the more recent one that we had, the Beauregard Kai's house. I want to show some pictures from the family line, and maybe before we go into that, we could talk a little bit about the whole idea, how the progress and the process by which you come up with these ideas and how you create it. So before we get into the family line, which takes place in 1892, as we mentioned, during a city-wide strike, and involves members of what I would call the Italian-American community, as well as, let's say, the Irish and other families that might have been here prior to that, who landed in New Orleans. Not really a lot of Creoles that you would say, like from Spanish or from French, that I remember in this. It was people who were black, who were no longer involved in slave, I guess you might say, job descriptions as far as it goes, but who would become domestics. In other words, they were being paid now to be domestics rather than be slaves in the domestic areas. And again, having to try to get for themselves a little bit of the American dream, trying to find a way to have a life for themselves and their children, etc. And so part of what you discuss is, in the course of this play is how do we get these very desperate, if you will, disparate groups together in the house, and how do they talk to one another? Do they have connections of some sort, or what? So when you started to do the family line, and what was it about 1892 that struck you as a good opportunity? Was it because you knew you were going to mount it in the BK house, or was it that you wanted to kind of move from 1874 to like 1892? What was the reasoning behind that?
We knew two things at the beginning. One thing we knew is that we wanted to do another piece sort of set in the Reconstruction or post-Reconstruction era. We'd done two, like you said, and we felt like there should be a third in this trilogy. The other thing we knew was we were going to do this partnership with the BK House. Annie Irvin and Chris Fountain, who worked there, have been amazing partners, and they had approached us about doing something after the Uninvited. And so we knew we wanted to do something with them. One of the pieces of history that they started to bring up as something that they really wanted to focus on with the house was the Italian and Sicilian American history. That part of the French Quarter, right across from the Ursuline Convent, was called Piccolo Palermo at the time. basically Little Sicily. And it was a place where there was a tremendous amount of Italian and Sicilian immigrants coming in. It was a warehouse district. It was tenement housing. And this is not really part of our French Quarter knowledge for the most part. We think of the French Quarter in this very bespoke way now, but at the time it was working class folks coming out off the river, off these boats, and making their way in the city. So once we knew that we were going to do something with the Italian and Sicilian American history, we were really interested in something that had to do with interracial politics at the time. And we were having a connection with a historian at UNO, two historians, one named Elizabeth Stevie. And Elizabeth Stevie was like, hey, have you heard of the 1892 general strike? One of the biggest feats of interracial labor organizing in our country's history. And we hadn't heard of it at all, but we're always looking for some hinge event in a new play that can offer us a way forward. And so it's a group of us who are making this at the time. At that time, it was a lead team of me and April Louise, Owen Ever, Rashawn May, and Shannon Flaherty. And we were immediately realized, okay, well, this is a really interesting moment when we can have lots of characters figuring out whether they feel like they should strike or not for various reasons. One of the biggest reasons that you wouldn't strike at the time, if you were part of one of these groups that were under the thumb of more powerful groups in the city, was that you would be subject to violence. Sicilian and Italian Americans were being beat up and killed in the city. And of course, Black and Black Creole Americans in New Orleans were still an incredibly oppressed group. And so we were looking at, okay, what is the reason that these people would come together to make this strike, the largest general strike in the city's history, 30,000 people walking off the job. So it's sort of an organic process. And oftentimes someone who's not us brings us an event that we say, yep, that's a great event for us to build a drama around.
Yeah. Well, now, again, I showed some pictures of some of the people involved.
Yeah.
The general strike, the way it was presented was that there were people who were trying to force like the Italian and Sicilian merchants from not being open. Is that basically they didn't want them to sell their wares? They wanted them to. I'm trying to remember
the story in that show was basically that one of the members of that family had been killed by people who didn't want them to strike and didn't want them to agitate.
So, and they didn't know exactly that he even had. It came out later on that they found out that he was dead, of course, but they didn't know that it was because of the politics, or if you will, the intrigue associated with the people who were trying to enforce their will.
Yeah, and that's fictional. That incident is fictional, but we're trying to base it on real histories. And one of the real histories of the time was that, people with big business had incredible power, and they were killing people who got in their way. There was sort of a corruption and agreement among big business and government. And so what people were fighting against was that power that business had.
Interestingly enough, too, one of the things you did with this last piece, again, the family line, because obviously Roleplay was more recent, but the family line in terms of this period piece that you did, was you actually did these character cards. You had people who were, and you could actually look at the card and you could look in the back and find out a little bit about the character. And it was like the actors were alive on the back of the card. You could read about them, you could learn more about them, and then you could follow that character as you did. Like you said, each one of the tracks was repeated. And so if you missed something for the first time, you could go to a different room while the other action is going on. You don't want to see the same thing all over again. So if you've seen something, you move out. I mean, I enjoy moving from one to the other to the other to the other. A lot of times, I won't stay for if I start to see something being repeated, I know what's already been said, and so I'll move on to another room. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's very interesting that the way it's structured, you usually find out important pieces by going into a different room, and so
Yeah.
it's all jigsaw pieces that all sort of come together at the end. And again, you've got a. Did you always have the bell? Was that you came up with?
Yeah, we always have this bell that rings at the beginning to let everyone know that it's started, and a bell that rings halfway through to let people know that it's repeated. I mean, it's interesting. I think that this process has shown us that people are really interested in finding their own path through a space. Not that, and I love sitting down in a theater and watching a show and the lights go down. But what we've seen over and over again is that people really respond to this freedom of choice.
Uh-huh.
It's a different kind of experience, and it's the kind of experience that you like to tell your friends about, right? Like, oh, I saw this amazing thing last night. I got to choose where I went around this house, and I went into these different rooms, because it sort of feels like you're discovering it for the first time. And it's not uncommon that you might end up in a room alone with one other character who's
Yeah.
giving a monologue or singing a song. And the magic of that personal live connection that we often talk about in theater is really lovely.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is I can only liken it. A few years back, NOLA Project did an Alice in Wonderland
Yeah.
presentation. They had three different tracks, and of the three tracks, one was a green track where you stayed stationary and people would come to you, they passed through, or there was the red track for the Red Queen, or the blue track for Alice, and you would follow Alice around, or you would follow the Red Queen around. You couldn't do all three. Now, if you stayed at the green site, the characters from the blue track and the red track would come there, and then they'd move on. And again, it was just perfectly timed. I don't know whether or not you all had a sort of thing, but they had material that in the event they were going too fast or too slow, they could add material. They said they never had to use it. That if it's so well rehearsed, you may. Do you all did you all have extra material to pad, so to speak, just in case you all went a little bit earlier than you should have, if somebody's lines weren't faster than they should have for whatever reason?
Yeah, the timing is a math. And it's interesting because, some immersive productions that are not word based or not narrative based, will use a music track in the back of different rooms so they can stay on time. But for a narrative based piece, you're never going to have the same dialogue take the exact same amount of time each night. It's always going to be variable. Sometimes it's variable by 5 seconds, sometimes it's variable by 30 seconds. And so, what you're trying to do, I mean, the secret behind how the timing always feels sharp is that you build in moments where people can lengthen or shorten something to wait for an entrance on one end, and the other person knows they can enter as soon as they need to. So, you sort of have one side of a scene equation has a vamp, and the other side of the scene equation has the green light. And so, in each time someone enters a space, you're trying to figure out, okay, who might have to vamp and who might have to use the green light. Now, that being said, the production really, you run it, and the track ran about, so a single track would run about 33 minutes, 50 seconds. And on a night to night basis, that really only changes by 30 seconds.
Wow.
So for the most part, and we ran it, I mean, we ran it for 3 months. So the actors did the show 65 times. They did a track, 120 times. So by the end of it, it
Got it.
was in their bones.
I have a couple of questions before we, because we're getting down to the end, and nobody's
Yeah.
come in yet tonight for whatever reason. Either they're interested in just watching. This will be broadcast back again. It'll be on. Obviously, it's being broadcast on the various channels that we've got. My YouTube channel, also the Facebook page for theatercriticism.com, and also on the NOLA Theater Folk group that we have. But I was wondering, in terms of the things to do that you all are looking to do, or are you thinking about some other venues outside of the quarter, any other historic places that you might be interested in? I mean, as an example, there are famous houses in New Orleans. Edgar Degas, for instance, has a house that was, he famously stayed in for 6 months while he visited his cousins. And you've got other famous places, the Petone House. I mean, are there other places that you've started to look at that might be, a venue that would be lending itself to a production in the future? Or
Yeah, we're open to it, but I'll tell you what our ambition is. I think we would like to run a production like this for a full year, and be able to pay artists a living wage and become part of the New Orleans sort of cultural landscape. It's a big ambition, and the reason I say it aloud is because maybe someone watching has some idea of a place, or we have a tourist economy here in the city. The way that shows run for a long time is through tourist economies. That's how Broadway works. And our ambition is just to see if we could actually run something like this and become not a tour and not a play, but sort of in between. It's a chance for you to see New Orleans history in a really unique way. And I do think that probably needs to happen in the quarter or adjacent to the quarter because of how tourism works here. But we're certainly interested in figuring out partnerships about where else this can go.
Yeah, and like there's the Claiborne House, which is in the Faubourg area. And you could do something on CC Claiborne, and again, I'm not saying that it, that you come up with a play just about him, but it might be something that, as the first governor of Louisiana, something went on, at that time that might be of some historic, and I guess the most important part, is got to have a certain amount of drama. You've got to have tension. You've got to have all the elements of a traditional drama to make it flow and to make the actors have some purpose on stage, and so it'll come across well. But again, I hope that works out real well for you, because I know that this is your niche, as I said, and I know that if you are able to do that, I would welcome it, with open arms. I would love to see, the whole thing about doing a whole year's productions, though, and this just as I'm going to tell it to you. You know what I'm about to say. Mardi Gras is going to get in the way, and then there's Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest and all these other things that we do that we love to do, whether it be even something inane like Satchmo Fest, which should be down at the end of the quarter. All those things can compete with your ability to put on a show and make it difficult for people to park, make it difficult for people to go see a show on a yearly basis. So,
it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I think that Mardi Gras is one of those seasons when people come into town as well and are looking for things to do.
Yeah.
So it's one of those times when you're like, it's like around Christmas, right?
Yeah, but Chris, free parade or pay money to go see a show.
That's true. Listen, I'm not going to argue with Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is the greatest theater event in the country.
I agree, and I love to be able to contribute to it. I was earlier, about the manuscripts. The manuscripts I write, which are the tableau for the balls, very similar to a play.
Yeah.
We've got lighting cues, we've got music cues, we've got the narration, which explains what goes on. Then you've got the actors, the maids, the dukes, the king, the queen, etc. So all of that, is part and parcel of what I do, and I think that if I didn't have some sort of a background in theater, it would be almost required, for something to do, for people to be able to appreciate it. Well, look, we're almost at the end of the hour. It goes by quick. And again, I want to thank you for being with me tonight.
Thanks
again,
so
I want to thank all the people who were out there, however many of them are watching now or watching later. Again, I've been wanting to have you on. I know for the last several weeks we talked about, and this week didn't work out, and that week didn't work out. But thankfully, you're here, and we were able to get it on. I know that I should let everybody know that next week, Lundi Gras, I will not be here, but I will try to return in 2 weeks. But a lot going on in New Orleans, and part of the scene has been enhanced quite a bit by people like Chris Kaminstein, Shannon Flaherty, Goat and the Road Productions. If you get a chance, folks, go see their stuff. I'm going to ask you to just bow up for just a little bit. Stick around, Chris, while I say goodbye to everybody. So thank you. All. Peace out.
Thanks,
hold on a second. All right. In the meantime, again, this is Alan Smason. My hope is that you'll enjoy these gatherings, NOLA Theater Talk. Again, I hope that you'll check us out, the NOLA Theater Folk Facebook group. You want to become a member? All you got to do is ask to join. We have our broadcast on theatercriticism.com's Facebook page. I regularly write to the theatercriticism.com site in order to be able to do reviews, etc. And so do a lot of people around the country. We hope you check that out, or on our YouTube channel. So hopefully you'll check that out. We'll be off next week. Please check us back in about 2 weeks. We hopefully will have some more interesting things. And again, I will see you at the theater.